Alrighty. Hello everyone, my name is Raymond Rodarte, and today I'll be presenting my research project on the relationship between social media use and perceived stress among college students. This project focuses specifically on two platforms of social media, Instagram and TikTok, which are some of the most widely used platforms among students today. Apologies for the sniffles, I am a little bit under the weather. So I chose this topic because social media is something that most of us interact with every single day, often for several hours, and I was ultimately interested in understanding whether that level of use has any impact on stress levels for college students. In this presentation, I'll walk through my research question, what existing studies say about this topic, the data and methods I used, my findings, and what conclusions we can draw from the results. And this presentation is for my sociology class, Quantitative Methods of Social Research. All right, let's begin. So, um, quick introduction to the project. Um, Social media, in my opinion, has become a central part of everyday life, especially for college students. Platforms, like I said earlier, Instagram and TikTok are used daily by nearly all students, with research showing about 98% usage rates. And these platforms are not just used occasionally, they are integrated into daily routines, whether that is during breaks, while studying, or even before going to sleep. Because of this, social media plays a major role in shaping how students communicate, compare themselves to others, as well as spend their time in general. While these platforms do provide entertainment, as well as connection and access to information, there is a growing concern about their impact on mental health, particularly stress. Many students report feeling overwhelmed, distracted, or even pressured when social media or when using social media, especially due to the constant exposure um, to social media's curated content or the For You page, which can elicit feelings of social comparison. This led to my research question: how does time spent on Instagram and TikTok relate to perceived stress among college students? Understanding this relationship is important because if social media contributes to stress, it has implications for student well-being, academic performance, and overall mental health. Okay, so for existing research, there shows to be a consistent relationship between social media use and negative mental health outcomes. There are three major themes in the research that I conducted. Firstly, increased social media use is linked to, there's three major themes in the research that currently exists. And first is the increased social media use. Um, Increased social media use is linked to higher levels of stress, as well as anxiety and depression. These studies show that more time individuals spend on social media, the more likely they are to experience negative emotional outcomes. The second theme, which is problematic use, such as addiction, excessive scrolling, or doom scrolling, and constant engagement, creates what researchers call a digital stress. This includes this includes feeling overwhelmed by notifications, information overload, and pressure to stay constantly connected to whoever you're following on Instagram, for example. Third, um, individual and contextual factors such as gender, identity, and social support can ultimately influence how social media affects mental health. This means that not everyone experiences social media in the same way. However, most studies treat social media as one general category rather than focusing on specific platforms. My study that I conducted addresses this gap by focusing specifically on Instagram and TikTok, which are highly visual and algorithm-driven platforms that may have stronger effects on stress. Based on this research, my hypothesis, or based on this research, yes, based on the existing research and of my question, my hypothesis is that higher daily usage will be associated with higher perceived stress among college students, specifically at Long Beach, California State University, Long Beach. So uh, going on to my individual research and the study that I designed, I used a quantitative survey design to examine the relationship between social media use and stress. Like I said earlier, the population is college students at California State University, Long Beach. I collected data by using a convenience sample of around 27 respondents through an online Qualtrics survey. The independent variable is daily hours spent on Instagram and TikTok, which participants reported based on their average usage over the past 7 days. The dependent variable is perceived stress, which was measured using the PSS-10 scale, which I acquired online. This is a widely used psychological scale designed to measure how overwhelmed or stressed individuals feel in their daily lives. And to analyze the data, I used descriptive statistics to understand general patterns, and Pearson correlation to examine the relationship between social media use and stress. This method allows us to determine whether there is a relationship between the variables, although it does not establish a causation. Now, for my results, the results showed that participants spent an average of about 6.75 hours per day on social media, which is relatively high, and this reflects how integrated these platforms are into daily life. The average stress score was about 32.5, which falls within a moderate range of perceived stress. When examining the relationship between the two variables, the correlation was positive, but it was weak, with an R value of 0.208. This means that in general, as social media use increased, stress levels also tended to increase slightly. However, the p-value was 0.394, which is greater than the standard significance level of 0.05. This basically means that the relationship is not statistically significant. In other words, while there is a slight trend, we cannot confidently conclude that social media use is related to stress in this sample, unfortunately. Limitations. There were several limitations to consider when interpreting these results. One of the biggest limitations for me was the sample size. With only 27 respondents, this reduces the statistical power of the analysis and ultimately makes it harder to detect meaningful relationships. Secondly, the data is self-reported, which can introduce bias. Participants may overestimate or underestimate their social media use or their stress levels. Thirdly, and most importantly, the stress scale had very low reliability, with a Cronbach's alpha of 0.188. This ultimately suggests that the items used to measure stress were not consistent with each other, which weakens the validity of these results. Finally, because the data is cross-sectional, which means it was collected at one point in time, we cannot establish causation. We can only observe relationships, but cannot determine cause and effect. To conclude, to conclude this presentation, the results do not support my hypothesis. While there was a weak positive relationship between social media use and stress, it was not statistically significant. These findings suggest that the relationship between social media use and stress may be more complex than expected, or that measurement and sample limitations affected the results. This study highlights the importance of using reliable measurement tools and larger sample sizes when conducting research. Future research should focus on improving reliability of stress measures, increasing the sample size, and using longitudinal designs to better understand how social media use affects stress over time. Additionally, future studies could examine different types of social media use, such as active use versus passive engagement to better understand these effects, which I think would make a big difference in the results. Okay. And this final slide is just the some of the key sources that informed my research, which includes studies on social media use, mental health, and stress measurement. Thank you guys. Thank you all for listening, and I appreciate your time. Alrighty, have a great day.